and what we do. We're also going to talk about how we do what we do, so you understand that in the context of the solution that we provide and have provided for the UK's #1 motorway service operator. And we're going to give you an opportunity to experience it, to actually go through a couple of examples and play with each other. So at some point, we will want you to put your microphones on, and we will want you to put your cameras on if that's okay. So this is get stuck in and interactive. And then finally, we're going to give you some opportunity for some questions. You can fire those in at us. Graham and I will be available a little bit after we finish as well, if that's helpful, and we'll give you some opportunities to reach out and connect to us in a way that suits you, should you choose to, that is. So a little bit about us then. So Thinking Focus, we're a behavioural change business, but we believe that individuals and teams underperform. Although that's not by choice, we believe it's because we get stuck. We can't get out of our own way. And that performance, all of our performance, is limited by interference, such as assumptions, biases, self-imposed limitations, and organisational constraints. In other words, we put obstacles in each other's way in order to do that. What we're looking to answer all the time is, how do you create a psychologically safe space where people can test, explore, share experiences, and remove those interferences so that they can perform at a higher level and without fear? Because certainly in the space of EDI, one of the learnings that we've had is that it can be scared to say the wrong thing, or say the wrong expression, or whatever it might be. So we want to create an environment where they can test and explore in a safe space. So let's dive into a use case, one where we've applied the methodology to culture. And this came from an organization who was challenged by its regulator, challenged by the regulator to bring the conduct rules to life. They effectively went out to the entire sector, the financial services sector, and said, we don't think you're living the conduct rules that they have. We think you're just playing along and ticking the boxes, so to speak. So a financial services business approached us and they challenged us. We need to deliver a project, and we've got some urgency around this. We need to create a level of culture change. We've got to do it with 1,500 people, and we need to do it within 90 days. Oh, and by the way, everybody's based at home, so we need to do it in a virtual way. So that then played out in terms of some requirements then that they had in order to satisfy them and meet their need, particularly with their main stakeholder in this case, which was the regulator. In essence, there were these elements in play. We had to work around the business. It needed to be flexible. It couldn't disrupt the organization, and particularly the contact centers where they had service to meet. The project had to be delivered in 90 days, as we've said. That was an FCA deadline, their regulator, and it needed to be deliverable by the internal teams. It couldn't rely on an external supplier to do that. And of course, we've talked about the fact that it was mid-pandemic, so it all had to go online, and we all had to find ways to get them to dial in. Of course, we used Zoom and Teams and all of those wonderful tools in order to make that happen. But one of the other requirements that came through was it had to be tailored around the organization. And what I mean by that is the different levels within the organization. So it needed to be as relevant at the most senior level as it did at the most junior level. It needed to kind of flush out any particular silos where one part of the organization saw it one way and one saw another way. And we ran lots of the sessions, particularly the early ones, to help the transition across to the organization. And one particular example sticks out where we got a junior member of the team, and we'd given an example of how they might meet one of the conduct rules. And one of the junior team members said, I get that we've all said we do the right thing, but can somebody tell me what the right thing actually is? To which the room went silent. And we got a multi-level audience in here. There was about 100 people, and nobody would answer the question. So it kind of said, well, hang on a minute, they're holding back, or they don't know, or they don't feel confident to share. So our goal was how do we create that environment? And this junior member of the team was brilliant because she flushed out a question everybody was thinking, but nobody was prepared to answer. So it allowed the group to explore that in conversation in breakout rooms, and then come back and see, well, do they all join up? Do they align? So we'll share a bit more of how that works in practice in just a second. So the goal was about for them was about building confidence. It was about how do we create a psychologically safe space where people can test assumptions, can look for checking their understanding without feeling silly or stupid, knowing that everybody's in this same process together. We wanted to make sure that they felt comfortable making the right choices in the moment when it mattered most. And that might be in terms of who to refer to. And part of that leads into the next requirement that they had. Their goal was to make sure everybody knew who they could go to and ask the question, who they could go to and talk about if they felt unsure about what to do and how to move forward. So that was one of the key requirements. And the solution, well, the solution we created or we used was What Would You Do? It's one of our multifaceted learning experiences that was actually born out of a client challenge. So we had an automotive client that needed their frontline managers to develop soft skills to be able to manage, engage, and raise the bar for all of their people. Couldn't be theoretical. It needed to be interactive, contextual to the workplace with the minimal effort required in terms of time away from the front line. And it couldn't, they're one of their requirements, couldn't hit the operation. It had to be cost effective. So we went away and we created a board game. And that board game blended these four elements of gamification, creating fun, energy, and motivation to learn. And often they didn't even realize they were learning. It used social learning to be able to share experiences, discuss, debate, find that shared pool of understanding. We added group coaching into it in order to be able to facilitate conversations. So this tool was something we would transfer into organizations. It wasn't something we necessarily did. And they could run those scenarios as many times as they wanted, create different conversations. And then psychology, well, psychology comes in two forms. The first is the safe space that we create because it's a game and people relax and feel comfortable when it's a game. And the second part of that is public commitment, where players can make a commitment at the end of the process about what they will do differently. And what we're tapping into is the psychology of public commitment, where we like to be consistent, to be congruent with the words that we use in front of our colleagues and peers. And What Would You Do initially was created as a physical board game, but of course the onset of COVID soon meant that we needed to create a virtual version of that. And that's something that we're going to share a little bit with you today. And that's now used to develop frontline managers. Even elite athletes use What Would You Do when they're preparing for major games. They get caught in lots of challenging decisions they have to make about what they put in the body, how they train, how they live their life. And we work with UK Anti-Doping to create a bespoke set of content for them. In fact, What Would You Do is perfect for any content that is subjective, where it's open to interpretation. What Would You Do will quickly raise the confidence of how players apply their knowledge and skills in the workplace. So how did that play out then? Well, actually, we used that What Would You Do principle with those four key components, and the impact was tremendous. The client actually saw four cultural measures improve. Trust, collaboration, inclusion, involvement, all increased. 98% of their colleagues actually took part in the session. So we got all but 2% through. And there were external factors as to why the other 2% couldn't get through. But 100% of those that actually took part felt better able to apply the conduct rules in the day job, which is what it's all about, right? They need to feel like they know what they're doing and are comfortable and confident doing that. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive in terms of the format and the content. In fact, there have been multiple requests for more of the same in the organization, and their relationship with the regulator improved too. So they were really, really proud of the fact they've moved the needle on such a wide variety of things here. And we collaborated with them to enter an award, and we're proud to say that we got the silver award as best use of social and collaborative learning technologies. Now let's move into an EDI challenge then. So we were challenged by the motorway service operator to raise the EDI bar as part of their leadership development program. And they got a 50 strong leadership population, and they needed them to have a deeper understanding and appreciation of equality, diversity, and inclusion, because it's the right thing to do first and foremost, but also because they've got a 6,500 strong diverse workforce spread across England, Scotland, Wales, and even Ireland. So they need to make sure that everybody's on the same page in terms of expectations and what to do. And their requirements were not too dissimilar. They needed this solution actually to meet a number of requirements, because people can be fearful, particularly on this topic. And when they're fearful of saying the wrong thing, asking the wrong questions, or taking a particular action, they tend to do nothing, or they avoid conversations, worried about saying that wrong thing. So we wanted this solution to be challenging for the group, but without them feeling attacked or put on the spot. We didn't want them to feel like they don't know, because they've got training and development around equality, diversity, and inclusion, but it was about how they applied it in practice, which was the key thing here. We wanted to engage them in the content and make it meaningful and relevant to the day job, the actual job they see, hear, feel, touch every day. We wanted to help the business to retain its people. One of the particular challenges that business faced at the time, for a whole host of reasons, was that they were losing people, and they wanted to better retain them. Lots of challenges, like most organizations facing that. Couldn't be death by PowerPoint. It had to be interactive and thought-provoking. It needed to feel safe to explore, to test and share without fear. But we also needed to understand, what's the impact when we get this wrong? So in terms of what's the human impact when we fail, how does this affect the individuals? How does this affect the team members? How does this affect the colleagues? And of course, there's a commercial impact to this as well. So they calculated the average cost of getting this wrong is £10,000 per person. But actually, it could be more than that if we can't resolve those issues and they're left to play their natural course in terms of potential ultimate consequences around some of these things. So again, we turn to the what would you do approach, creating this safe space, creating this environment, but we linked it to their values. We wanted to create a golden thread through their values to how they deal with each other as colleagues and human beings. We built an understanding of what the common biases and heuristics were, the cognitive shortcuts that they face every day that unwittingly trip them up. And we partnered with them to design a set of scenarios that were relevant and relatable to the audience. And this workshop is now embedded in their leadership program, their high potential group, and their new manager program. So when people move into those roles, they go through this process. So what's the impact been so far? Well, it's still relatively early days, but every session that we've run so far has had universal positive feedback. They've enjoyed the fact that they can talk about this difficult topic in a safe space, knowing that the aim is about leveling up everybody. It's about better appreciation of why this topic is important, how we would apply our knowledge and skills to deal with the people in their teams and the wider organization. They could test, explore, use what if around potential consequences to agree on the way for the organization. So a unified understanding of why we do it the way we do it and what the most appropriate way for that organization would be. They understand the benefits of getting it right and the consequences if they don't, both in terms of human impact, financial impact, and reputational damage. And they've got one of, we're really pleased to work with this client because they've got one of the most progressive chief people officers that we've met. When faced with a person transitioning, the first ever for their company that they were aware of, at least, rather than panic or stick to policy, they sat down with the person and worked it through with them so that they could find the right way for that individual and effectively make sure that what policy they have is fit for purpose. And that led to a number of changes, and it led to a really progressive way forward in terms of that. And I think there's been subsequent examples of where people have transitioned since as well. So very progressive in their attitude. So pleased to work with a client that thinks in the way that they do. So that's enough from me. What we're going to do is we're going to have a go at some of the examples, give you a flavour of what this feels like, so you can contextualise what I've said in terms of how that feels to actually work through some of those examples. So we're going to go through 4 steps. Top left, we're going to set the frame. So we're going to present you with a teaser statement, as we call it, a Twitter headline or even a Daily Mail headline. Then what we're going to do is we're going to add some context. So this is the situation, and it's deliberately framed without all the information. And you've got to make some judgments around that. We're going to then ask you to vote. So you're going to need your mobile device or at least a separate browser that you can use in order to vote on what you would do from a set of 4 options. And then what we're going to do is we're going to divide you into groups, get you to have a think about it, have a talk about it. What do you think? Why do you think that? What are the risks, implications? How does that play out? So in other words, what would you do? And where are the points of difference? Where are the points of similarity? And then what we'll do is we'll bring you back after each one, assuming we get time to play more than one, bring you back together and see what you thought and what your thoughts were. So if we're all comfortable with that, this is where cameras on, and when we get you into your breakout rooms, microphones on as well. So all comfortable with that? Okay, so let's dive in. We've got 12 examples. We've got a whole range of different ones from, race to sex to disability and things like that. So what we're going to do is share a Daily Mail headline with you. He might not be the best candidate, but he ticks a box for the team. So we're all comfortable with that. Next, we're going to put some context in for you. So you've been interviewing for a key role in your team, and you are down to 2 excellent candidates. You have completed the final interview with both candidates, and it's decision time. One candidate, Mary, has the depth of experience you're looking for and has worked in a commercial environment and in a team just like yours. You also think she'd be a good fit, as she also meets the general dynamic of the team, being a female in her late 20s. The other candidate is Robert. He has very similar experience, but he hasn't worked in a commercial team before, having his background in higher education. He would have more to learn and could be a bigger gamble on your part, but would bring a more diverse outlook to the team due to his background in education. Robert is also Black, and you recognize that your team isn't currently that culturally diverse. So what he lacks in experience, he would make up for in terms of cultural diversity. So all comfortable with that? Let's give you some choices then to work through. So you've got 2 ways of doing this. You can drop into a browser, go to slido.com, put in the event code EDI, or just you grab your camera, use your QR code reader, and that'll bring those 4 options up for you.
It might be worthwhile saying, as you're thinking about this, maybe think about 2 things. One, how you might answer it yourself, but also how might others in your organization, managers or team leaders in your organization, how might they vote for this? Would it be the same?
We've got 7 votes so far. Some of you will be sitting there thinking, I wouldn't do any of those. In which case, what I'd invite you to do is pick the one closest to what you would do. We'll drop you into some breakout rooms where what we really want to do is get you to think about what was you thinking, what was going through your mind? What do you think the right thing to do is? And if the right answer or the best answer is not there, what else would you do? What would you do differently? How would you add to whatever's there? Or actually, is there something different you do entirely? But fundamentally, what would you do and why? That's what we want to know. Welcome back. This is where you're going to need your microphones on, because we're interested in what you thought, what you discussed. Thank you, Amy.
With my team members. So it was Tracy with me and Fern as well. So I think we had an interesting discussion. 2 of us swayed toward option 1 as a first point, because we'd looked at it from a slightly different perspective. The scenario of it being that Robert wasn't as suitable as a candidate, and he was being considered for other reasons. And then but then also someone else brought a different viewpoint in of, well, actually they read it as they were both suitable candidates. So, should we look at bringing some more diversity into the team and sway towards there? So it was an interesting discussion. And I think it brought it to light that you can look at the scenario in different ways, can't you? And read different things into it to inform your decision.
Absolutely.
It's a good observation, Amy. We find that with all the scenarios, regardless of the topic that we use.
Yeah.
That people do go, that's not quite how I read that one.
Yeah.
Or even in terms of some of just they pick out a word.
Yeah.
And a word means different things to different people. So that is interesting when you look at things from that point of view.
Yeah, or it might relate to an experience that you've personally had as well. So again, you'll have a slightly different skew on that too, I think. Yeah. But it sparked some good conversation around it. So yeah, it was good.
Thank you.
It's interesting. We ran this scenario with the group. We ran it early in the week, last week. I've already forgotten my weekend. Last week, and this one, we got a real mixture of I'm looking for that diversity in terms of my team, and I want to bring that through, and this gives me an opportunity. And then the whole positive discrimination conversation emerged, and what that meant, and what that, what you could or couldn't do in terms of that, what was acceptable, what was unacceptable, and all of the kind of questions that people have in their minds about, well, what can I do, what can't I do, were able to be externalized, shared in terms of what's the right thing to do. And can we effectively evidence why we've picked the candidate that we've chosen? Because that's ultimately the test, isn't it? And I think that was right. We had two excellent candidates here. They just had different backgrounds in terms of their role that they've performed and where they've operated in the past. Thank you, Amy. Somebody from another group.
We had quite a similar conversation in that we initially were like, we probably need a bit more information. So if it's a really niche role or a really niche that had needed specific experience and regulatory experience, then that might be a different scenario. So we kind of came out with a similar sort of outcome, that I think we were perhaps looking more to recruit Robert. However, going into it, we'd read it very differently as a group. So we had a really interesting discussion. And the reason being not so much around, so it's about diversity of thought we were talking about, really. So actually bringing a different sector in. They both had the skill set, experience, and actually introducing different sector knowledge and understanding into a team is really valuable. So we kind of looked at it from that perspective.
And I think that's right. I think if you get, there's a bias in play, isn't there, that groupthink. So if we all think the same thing, do we create diversity of thought? Do we create that? And there's an interesting observation around the Houses of Parliament, and you look at it and go, how diverse is it? But actually, many are educated at the same universities. So actually, where does diversity of thought actually come from? Are we not actually repeating the same things in terms of our thinking and therefore mistakes, because we've not got that true diversity of thought? And it's same in organizations. Sometimes do we need somebody to disrupt the flow, disrupt the thinking patterns that we have in order to break through in new areas? Recruiting either here wouldn't necessarily be a problem, because they've ticked the boxes in terms of that as a difference.
I suppose is it also, because is it also looking at positive discrimination if you're recruiting Mary? Because I mean, in the scenario it talked about, she's a female, late 20s.
Female, late 20s.
So it's the same either way, isn't it? So yeah, that was.
You're right, and potentially yes. That either if the candidate that was unsuccessful, either one could potentially have was it really fair?
Yeah.
What was the recruitment decision finally based on?
So based on that, I'd ask my boss to make the decision.
But you wonder how many would.
Yeah.
You wonder how many would actually go for that option.
Yeah, it was interesting because we sort of had similar discussions to what we've talked about here. But Mary, you might want to speak up actually, because you had some great experience of being in this situation and really seeing the value of sort of recruiting, going down the diversity route.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was saying that in my one of my previous roles in a different organisation, I was in quite a small team and we were very undiverse, and we really, really suffered from that. And we really could have done with our manager recruiting somebody that had different experience to us in every sense, because we were just so limited in our knowledge and our experience, and so the solutions that we came up with were also limited. The other thing we talked about in the group was, and we had a mix, some people recruited Robert, some people recruited Mary, but we were saying to recruit Robert, that you'd need to be sure that he was an excellent candidate, and because that's that's the people that did want to recruit Robert, that's what we saw was excellent candidate. So you know that he's going to be able to do it, because if you're just ticking a box and he's not excellent and can't do the job, you're just setting him up to fail and really undermining everything about EDI as well, and kind of turning the company off and the staff off from that idea. But if yeah, having seen the word excellent, like, okay, well, he can do it. And yeah, it's nice to have that kind of diversity of thought, definitely.
And it is an interesting thing that when we talk about diversity, diversity of thought is really important, for all the reasons that we've talked about. And that's a very different thing than let's get somebody who fits a certain type to join the team, as opposed to actually how diverse is our thinking. If it's not, then it could be worthwhile trying to seek that out, whatever that diversity of thought might look like.
And I think it is being really clear what you want, what you need to make sure that does it tick the brief that you've advertised for, and all the rest of it. So that's just kind of a snippet of how this plays out. But in the way that we would normally do this would be a facilitated discussion. So you'd have a facilitator asking questions, prompting those thoughts, and responding to the comments and playing devil's advocate with that says, well, okay, what are the consequences of that? How might that play out? What if this happened or that happened, and how would that then emerge in terms of the right decision? What if we did recruit Robert? What's the potential challenge from Mary? What if we recruited Mary? What's the potential challenge from Robert? And how do we make sure that we've got that robust, so we're making the right decision and we can actually defend that decision if we're challenged in terms of the choices that we make, because probably happens more and more these days in the recruitment space. Okay, well, let's see how you voted, shall we? Which is really interesting. So we had let's go for Mary was the predominant view. Actually, 40% thought actually we could recruit Robert. He does bring some different thinking, some diverse views, and of course he's got a background that might actually challenge the way we do things around here. And somebody would go for another round of interviews and look for reasons to employ Robert to make you feel better about your decision. What's the danger of that particular response?
Amy, you've come off mute. Did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I would, based on the discussions we'd had, I'd probably change my answer now. So just to throw that out there.
But isn't that what it's about? It's about, this social learning aspect that says we've got practical experience of things like this from Mary, which she brilliantly and kindly shared with us. And you're going to go, well, hang on a minute, let's think about this differently. And that's what this process is all about. And actually, with something like equality, diversity, inclusion, we only ever run this because we're not diversity experts. We're not experts in this field, but we are experts in terms of socialized learning and how we bring people together to have a great conversation about this stuff. So whenever we run this with internal expertise, subject matter experts on the inside who would work with us in order to bring a number of things, subject matter expertise being one, but also the internal understanding of what it feels like in the organizations that you work with. So it's a real partnership model in terms of how we typically deliver this. And this particular model, certainly with the client that we're operating with at the moment. So very much around, it's not us saying this is what you've got to do and what you've not got to do, because all of this comes back to one statement. It depends. And that's the challenge for your people in your organization. Very much like the example we gave you around culture change, we all say we'll do the right thing, but what is the right thing? And nobody can answer the question. It's the same with this topic too, as it is with lots of the topics we deal with. Well, what does good look like? Well, that's part of the next step in the process, is that we would reflect on what we've learned. Amy, you kindly said, well, I would change my mind based on the conversation. And that's kind of what happens here. We're not saying any of these are 100% right, 100% wrong, but there are implications with all of them. And are we clear what they are? Are we clear what that means for our organization and for us? Because one of the things about the consequences in particularly with EDI is if the organization can demonstrate it's done everything it can process-wise for you to follow that would mean you're protected, and you choose to go outside of that, the liability lands with you. And not everybody necessarily appreciates or understands that. So the robustness of your processes, the reason, certainly in the organization we work with, the HR people go, process exists for a reason. It's to protect you. It's not just another crap form to fill in. It exists for a reason. It's there to protect you. It's there to keep us in line with our expectations. So that's really interesting. But I think, if you're looking for reasons to employ, Robert, you're in danger of positively discriminating. That's the key thing in this particular statement. So you've got to be really wary about, and I'm taking the words literally, by the way. So it's interesting how people interpret the words, but I am taking those words literally.
And I think what we've found using these, and again, regardless of topic, but particularly in the EDI space, and Ricky mentioned this earlier on, one of the most common kind of statements we get at the start of a workshop looking at this is about people who are afraid to say the wrong thing. Not with they've got any kind of malintent to do or to offend or anything like that. We had a senior guy on one program, guy in his kind of late 50s, who made that comment. He said, I'm just afraid of saying the wrong thing. And what we see in this, using this model and socializing the learning, is people who work together will have those kind of conversations. Will say, or say something that they go, I'm not quite sure I can say this, but, and they'll have those, that's the kind of conversation you want an open conversation. What is it that's stopping someone? What is it that's driving someone to take a certain course of action? So the third one here, I did another round of interviews. Quite often people go, when they choose that one, they go, well, I wouldn't actually be adding a round of interviews in to look for reasons to employ Robert, but I'm just adding in another round of interviews just to look at both Mary and Robert again. But then your question is, does a bias kick in? So it's the conversations are for us by far the most interesting part of this kind of social learning model.
I worked for the organisation that Ricky sort of used as the case study at the beginning with the FCA and the conduct rules. And I think one of the interesting things for me, and I think it worked really well within this diversity and inclusion space, was challenging people even around their answers in the room, because when you sometimes put people into a situation like this, you get the politically correct conversations for some people coming out, and then you actually kind of can go one step further and say, well, would you really do that? And what's stopping you in this organisation? Because in our sort of little group our breakout group before, we kind of also touched on the fact that culturally within organisations, it might not just be what you would do, but culturally there might be things that get in the way of you making possibly the best decision, and kind of getting all those sort of challenges out in the open as well. It can be quite useful for that conversation rather than just what you would do, but how that might be impacted by the culture of the organisation that you work in.
Yeah,
I think, Alison, thank you. I think that's a really important comment that and that's why doing this with internal people at the same time means that they can bring some of that, say, really, do we do that? And actually, the relationship you have with your line manager can have a significant impact on how you operate and how you behave. And that's one of the things that we try and tease out within the questions in order to understand, particularly if you are, in something like equality and diversity, something like conduct rules, where actually our behavior can have consequences, serious consequences for you and for the organization. And that's the important part, is making sure people they're not afraid to do the right thing, but they're not afraid to reach out and ask for help if they need it. Much rather that than make the wrong choice or the wrong decision in the moment. And that's what we're trying to do with this.
And just put on your point there, Alison, one of the things we do see sometimes in these in-house sessions is where you get two people who've worked together for a long time, and one person goes for the politically correct answer, and the other person goes, well, I've worked with you for the last 3 years and you've never done that before. So you do get people who know each other really well in these sessions starting to challenge each other, positively challenge each other around you know, they go in for what they think they should say as opposed to what they would really do. So it is very powerful for that.
Okay, conscious of time, so just a couple of more bits to share. The next stage in the process really is about asking 3 key questions. What does good look like for us? What stops us doing that? So you're teasing out some of the limiters. You know, we said at the very beginning, what gets in our way? We get stuck. What stops us from doing the right thing? And what will we do to ensure that we always do the right thing? So we're causing a moment of reflection in every session, and we see these sessions lasting probably an hour at most. In organizations, you might just pick one scenario and run with it. It doesn't necessarily need to go through all of those things. But the third question here is that public commitment question. So what you're going to do with what you've learned, in essence. In equality and diversity, we're basically going, how do we take responsibility for our biases? How do we make sure that we can challenge each other in a safe way, one that isn't hypercritical, using empathy and curiosity to connect with others, bringing in respect and a bit of courage in terms of being prepared to put yourself out there and ask people, how do they want to be identified as? How do they want to be communicated with in terms of some of those things? From your standpoint, some things that you can do next, should you choose to. One is we could run a demo for you in your organization, so you could test it and see how it works for you in your organization. You can access my diary, access 45 minutes. We'll talk about your specific needs if you've got some and you want to talk about that further, or you just want to ask some more questions. That's absolutely fine. And all the QR codes will take you to that. We will happily share the document with you after the event, should you want it. And we've got 6 scenarios wrapped up in a pack that you can access, have a look at, have a flow through, see some of the questions, some of the background, some of the reflection activities that we would do with this, should you choose to. So you can access all 3 of those in terms of next steps, should you choose to. I'll leave that on for a second and then basically go, is there any questions, any burning questions you've got now? Like I said, Graham and I will be around for a little while longer. Should you want to drop in, ask a question while we're here. Over to you guys, really.
No questions from my side. Just thank you. That's been really useful to see kind of different category and topic that the tool can be used for. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. I need to go now, but thanks. It was really useful.